With a single deliberate stroke of his pen, King Charles finalized a decision that would send shockwaves through the royal household long before the public learned of it. The document before him did far more than assign a different royal residence. It ordered Queen Camilla to leave Clarence House and transferred responsibility for the historic property to Duchess Sophie. The decision immediately altered the balance of influence within the monarchy and marked the beginning of one of the most emotionally charged transitions inside the royal family. Charles remained seated after signing the order. He did not call anyone into the room or celebrate the completion of the document. Instead, he quietly looked at the final page, fully aware that the signature represented far more than an administrative change. It closed one chapter of royal life while opening another, and he understood that every person affected by the decision would experience it differently. The document itself was an official residence directive that determined who would oversee one of the monarchy's most historic homes. Under its provisions, Camilla would no longer manage Clarence House. The order transferred responsibility for the residence, its household staff, ceremonial functions, and administrative authority to Sophie. For Charles, the decision was deeply personal. Clarence House had never been an ordinary building. It carried generations of royal history. It had once been the home of Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and later became Charles's residence during the long years he served as Prince of Wales. Within those walls, he prepared for kingship, carried out official responsibilities, and experienced some of the most significant moments of his life. For Camilla, however, the house represented something entirely different. It was the place where she gradually earned public acceptance after years of controversy and criticism. Every room reflected a period of determination during which she worked to establish herself as a respected member of the royal family. When the sealed document finally reached her, she sensed its importance before reading a single sentence. She carefully opened the envelope and began reviewing its contents. After reaching the opening paragraph, she stopped. She read it again. The words seemed almost impossible to accept. This was not a temporary relocation. It was not a routine adjustment to royal housing. It was a final decision. Clarence House would no longer be her official home. She gripped the chair beside her as the reality settled in. The residence that had become the center of her public and private life was no longer hers to oversee. Yet, an even greater surprise waited within the document. The directive granted Sophie responsibilities extending far beyond simple occupancy. She would oversee household appointments, ceremonial access, internal administration, private archives, and the future management of the property on behalf of the crown. The authority Camilla had gradually built over many years would now belong to someone else. The transfer was complete. What made the situation even more difficult was the secrecy surrounding the decision. Charles had prepared the directive several days earlier without discussing it publicly. Only a very small group knew what was happening. According to internal palace records, Prince William, Sophie, and 2 senior constitutional advisors had reviewed the proposal before it was finalized. William had seen the draft. Sophie had been quietly informed. Camilla, however, remained completely unaware until every detail had already been approved. The realization was painful. She had not been invited into the discussion. She had not been asked for her opinion. Instead, she learned of the decision only after it became official. Before she could request an explanation from Charles, another message arrived. An aide informed her that Sophie had already been invited to receive the principal keys to Clarence House. The symbolic meaning was unmistakable. Keys do more than unlock doors. They represent responsibility, trust, and authority. For Camilla, those keys also represented the end of a chapter she believed would continue for years. The question quickly spread throughout the household. Why had Charles chosen Sophie? The answer required understanding what Clarence House truly represented. To many people, it appeared to be simply another royal residence. Inside the family, it meant far more. For Charles, it symbolized decades of preparation, responsibility, and personal history. For Camilla, it became proof that she had finally secured a respected place beside the man she loved. For Sophie, it had always remained outside her expectations. She had never pursued the residence or sought the influence connected to it. Her reputation had been built on quiet service rather than visible ambition. Now the lives of all three had become linked by a decision that none of them could completely escape. Charles himself carried memories of Clarence House stretching back many years. Before ascending the throne, he spent much of his life there while serving as Prince of Wales, the traditional title held by the monarch's eldest child and heir. Within those rooms he learned the responsibilities of public life, experienced years of waiting, and prepared for the future that eventually arrived. The residents witnessed his successes, disappointments, and gradual understanding of leadership. Meanwhile, Camilla quietly walked through the familiar rooms that had become part of her everyday life. She paused beside furniture she had personally selected and reflected on the years spent transforming the residence into a welcoming home. Every room contained memories. Every hallway reminded her of the effort required to earn acceptance within an institution that had once viewed her with suspicion. Now those same spaces carried a different meaning. Soon another woman would occupy the office she had used, guide the household staff she had worked alongside, and continue responsibilities she believed would remain hers. Across another part of the royal estate, Sophie received her own message. She read the invitation only once before handing it silently to Prince Edward. There was no excitement, no celebration. Instead, she admitted that accepting Clarence House could easily be misunderstood. People might believe she had benefited from Camilla's loss, even though she had never requested either the residence or the authority connected to it. Edward listened quietly as Sophie confessed that fulfilling her duty suddenly felt emotionally uncomfortable. What appeared to outsiders as an honor felt, to her, dangerously close to disloyalty. William viewed the situation from another perspective. During a private discussion with Charles, he supported the transfer because he believed Clarence House had become increasingly affected by competing influences, informal alliances, and internal disagreements. He argued that Sophie possessed the experience, discipline, and discretion needed to restore stability, without allowing the residence to become an independent center of influence within the monarchy. His support was not directed against Camilla. It reflected concern for the long-term strength of the institution. Yet Charles still had one final reason for making the decision. A confidential household assessment had identified Sophie as the senior royal most trusted to oversee sensitive responsibilities. The report praised her years of dependable public service, successful overseas engagements, and consistent loyalty to Queen Elizabeth II. It also concluded that Clarence House could not continue operating effectively while uncertainty surrounded its leadership. Before accepting the responsibility, Sophie requested one thing. She wanted to read the assessment herself. Only by understanding the evidence behind Charles's decision could she determine whether accepting the residence truly served the monarchy or merely deepened an already painful family divide. The crisis surrounding Clarence House did not begin with the royal decree that removed Camilla from its control. That document was only the final consequence of a conflict that had been quietly growing behind palace walls for weeks. Long before any signature appeared on official papers, a private royal reception exposed a struggle over influence that King Charles could no longer ignore. For months, Charles believed the disagreements within the household could still be resolved discreetly. Small concerns had begun appearing with increasing frequency. Guest lists changed without explanation. Internal briefings reached people who had not been authorized to receive them. Decisions that should have followed established procedures were quietly altered before reaching the king. Individually, each incident seemed minor. Together, they revealed a troubling pattern. Charles understood that every royal household experiences disagreements. Differences of opinion were inevitable in an institution built on tradition, hierarchy, and responsibility. What concerned him was something different. The conflict was no longer remaining personal. It was beginning to affect the operation of the monarchy itself. If private tensions started influencing official ceremonies and constitutional responsibilities, the damage could extend far beyond family relationships. The turning point arrived during preparations for a Commonwealth patronage reception. One of the most carefully organized parts of the event involved the ceremonial receiving line, where senior members of the royal family formally welcomed invited guests. To outsiders, the arrangement might appear largely symbolic. Inside royal life, however, the order of the receiving line carries significant meaning. It reflects trust. It communicates seniority. It signals the confidence placed in individual members of the royal family. Only minutes before the reception was due to begin, Camilla quietly called one of the palace aides into a private room at Clarence House. Her instructions were delivered calmly. She directed the aide to remove Sophie's name from the principal receiving line and place her in a less prominent position. There was no argument, no raised voice, no public announcement. Yet the meaning behind the instruction was unmistakable. Anyone familiar with royal protocol would recognize that Sophie's role had been deliberately reduced. The revised program reached Sophie only moments before the reception. She carefully reviewed the amended document. Without complaint, she folded it once and handed it back. She made no public objection. She did not question the decision in front of the staff. Instead, she entered the reception exactly as expected and fulfilled every responsibility with professionalism and composure. Guests noticed nothing unusual. But Charles noticed everything. From across the room, he watched Sophie greet visitors with grace, despite understanding that she had quietly been placed in a diminished position. Her composure impressed him. Her silence troubled him. After the reception concluded and the final guest departed, Charles privately confronted Camilla. He asked a direct question. Had she ordered the change? Camilla did not deny her involvement. Instead, she explained that Sophie needed to understand where authority truly rested within the royal household. Those words affected Charles more deeply than she realized. He no longer heard only a disagreement about protocol. He heard a challenge to his own authority as monarch. The issue became even more serious after palace officials presented additional evidence. A formal household memorandum documented previous occasions where ceremonial arrangements had been altered without Charles's final approval. The Commonwealth reception had not been an isolated incident. 3 earlier events showed similar patterns. Guest access had been adjusted, seating plans had been revised, speaking roles had been reassigned. Each alteration appeared small. Taken together, they suggested an organized pattern of unofficial decision-making. Charles read the memorandum carefully. Then he read it again. He placed it beside the unfinished residence directive that had remained on his desk for several days. For a long time he remained silent. The king reflected on the months that had led to this moment. He had attempted compromise. He had encouraged discussion. He had hoped private conversations would prevent deeper division. Instead, the tensions continued to grow. Finally, Charles reached a decision. He instructed that Camilla meet him privately. No advisors would attend. No secretaries would be present. No members of the family would participate. This conversation would take place only between husband and wife. When Camilla entered the room, she immediately sensed the seriousness of the meeting. Charles stood beside the fireplace. The signed residence directive rested on a nearby table. He indicated a chair, but Camilla remained standing near the doorway. Neither person raised their voice. The calmness made the conversation even more difficult. For years, they had endured public criticism, personal controversy, and intense media attention together. Now they faced something far more painful, a collapse of trust inside their own household. Charles spoke first. His words were measured but firm. He explained that the decision would not affect Camilla's royal title or public status. She would remain queen consort. However, her authority over Clarence House had ended. The residence would no longer operate under her direction. Charles explained that the monarchy, as an institution, had to remain stronger than individual disagreements. His decision, he insisted, was not motivated by personal resentment. It was intended to restore clear lines of authority that should never have become uncertain. Camilla immediately understood the significance of what was happening. Clarence House represented far more than accommodation. It provided trusted staff, private offices, meeting rooms, scheduling influence, and daily operational support. Control of the residence meant influence within the wider royal household. Without it, much of the practical structure supporting her responsibilities would disappear. Charles slowly moved the decree across the table. The transfer, he explained, would take effect immediately. Camilla did not reach for the document. Instead, She looked directly at him and asked a difficult question. Had William persuaded him to make this decision? Charles answered without hesitation. The signature belonged to him. The judgment belonged to him. The responsibility would remain his alone. Camilla rejected that explanation. She accused Charles of rewarding Sophie simply because she rarely challenged decisions while punishing the person who had always spoken honestly. In Camilla's view, Sophie had gained trust by remaining quietly in the background while gradually strengthening her influence. Charles listened carefully before revealing another part of the household review. The investigation had discovered that confidential briefings had circulated in Camilla's name without receiving his approval. Some of those recommendations directly concerned Sophie's ceremonial responsibilities, public appearances, and household position. Charles explained that disagreement itself was not the problem. Private influence operating outside official procedures was. Camilla responded with an accusation that changed the entire conversation. She claimed William had spent months building a case against her. According to her, the Commonwealth reception had simply provided the final opportunity to force Charles into choosing between protecting his marriage and protecting the future reign. She believed William had never been interested merely in improving palace procedures. She believed he wanted her influence removed before becoming king. Charles did not answer immediately. Instead, he quietly opened the door and instructed the transition team waiting outside to begin implementing the residence transfer. Camilla remained standing inside the room. The decree had removed Clarence House from her control, but the question she left behind remained unresolved. Had Charles acted entirely on his own judgment, or had William's growing influence already begun shaping the future of the monarchy before he officially inherited the crown? That question would soon lead father and son into another private confrontation, one centered not on property, but on trust itself. Prince William understood immediately why his father had asked such a difficult question. The issue extended far beyond Clarence House itself. Within the monarchy, a royal residence can become much more than a home. It can evolve into an independent center of influence, shaping household appointments, charitable patronages, access to senior royals, internal communications, and even the public image of the institution. If too much authority gathered around one household instead of remaining with the crown, it could gradually create competing sources of power. William knew that danger all too well. As heir to the throne, he possessed no constitutional authority to remove Camilla from Clarence House. That decision belonged entirely to the reigning monarch. However, his observations carried considerable importance. The conflicts developing today could easily become inherited problems during his own reign. Charles looked directly at his son. He wanted complete honesty. Had William influenced the investigation? Had he pressured palace advisors? Had he quietly encouraged the decision that ultimately removed Camilla from the residence? William answered without hesitation, although frustration could be heard beneath his controlled voice. He admitted that he had shared evidence with his father. The material included staff testimony, internal reports, and records showing that official briefings had been altered without proper authorization. He accepted responsibility for presenting the facts. But he firmly denied demanding Camilla's removal. That decision, he insisted, belonged to Charles alone. I revealed the problem, William explained. I did not choose the punishment. Charles remained unconvinced. He asked another question. Had Sophie been involved in encouraging the outcome? William slowly shook his head. He then revealed information from a documented family consultation that changed Charles's understanding of the entire situation. Before the residence transfer had been approved, Sophie had actually argued against immediate action. She believed the conflict should first be resolved through private mediation. Rather than imposing a formal decision, she had urged Charles to create an opportunity for reconciliation. Her concern was simple. Removing the queen consort from Clarence House could deepen divisions inside the family and create the appearance that the residence itself had become a prize to be won. Charles absorbed the revelation in silence. Until that moment, he had assumed Sophie accepted the decision because she believed it necessary. Now he learned something very different. She had resisted the proposal. Only when every alternative had failed did she reluctantly accept the responsibility placed before her. William then presented another confidential document. It was a succession planning assessment prepared by senior advisors responsible for evaluating long-term constitutional stability. The report identified Sophie as the most suitable senior royal to provide continuity during any future transition between Charles's reign and William's. Its conclusion rested not on popularity or personal relationships, but on years of dependable service, discretion, and institutional trust. The document demonstrated that support for Sophie extended well beyond William's own opinion. Household officials, senior advisors, and experienced members of the royal family had independently reached similar conclusions. No organized campaign against Camilla had existed. The recommendation reflected concern for stability rather than personal rivalry. Charles slowly closed the report. For the first time, he realized that although the final decision had been entirely his own, many people had quietly shared the same concerns. Before father and son could continue their discussion, an urgent message interrupted the meeting. Palace staff reported that Camilla had begun dismissing employees, opening secured cabinets, and removing documents from private offices before the transition team had completed its work. Charles immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. William recognized it as well. Their disagreement was no longer about influence or responsibility. It had become an operational crisis. While Charles questioned whether his judgment had been shaped by others, events inside Clarence House were unfolding rapidly. The first signs of the transition did not appear in newspapers or official announcements. They appeared inside the residence itself. Drawers opened. Cabinets were unlocked. Boxes lined the corridors. Members of the household received conflicting instructions as preparations for departure accelerated. Camilla moved through the familiar rooms with remarkable composure. She refused to allow anyone to see defeat. She understood that the residence directive permitted her to remove personal belongings. However, objects belonging to the crown could not legally accompany her. Official correspondence, state documents, historical furnishings, and records connected to public duties remained property of the monarchy. Those distinctions mattered greatly. Clarence House served not only as a private home, but also as an official royal workplace connected to generations of national history. To prevent confusion from growing, Charles authorized a formal transition team to take charge. Officials began carefully cataloging rooms, documenting furniture, reviewing archives, and assigning responsibilities for the property's future management. Their role was not to take possession personally. It was to prepare the residents for responsible stewardship on behalf of the crown. Even so, every completed inventory and every sealed cabinet made Camilla's departure feel increasingly final. At one point, she entered the private dining room and stopped without speaking. Her place card had already been removed from the silver holder that had marked her seat for years. The small change affected her more deeply than she expected. She quietly dismissed the remaining staff, closed the door behind them, and sat alone. No tears appeared. She simply stared at the empty space before her. In that moment, she realized how quickly decades of routine could disappear through administrative decisions. Meanwhile, Sophie refused to enter Clarence House while the packing continued. During a documented telephone conversation, she informed Charles that she would not allow the transition to resemble a personal victory. She viewed stewardship as a responsibility rather than a reward. Arriving while Camilla was still leaving, she believed would only deepen the pain. Charles respected her decision despite the complications it created. Shortly afterward, another concern emerged. Officials discovered that a locked dispatch box containing confidential correspondence relating to royal patronages had been removed from its registered location. A dispatch box serves as a secure container for highly sensitive official documents. Camilla's private secretary confirmed that it had been taken under her instructions. However, the contents now legally fell within the responsibilities transferred to Sophie. Charles immediately prepared to authorize security officers to recover it. Sophie intervened before that happened. She requested one private meeting with Camilla. The dispatch box, she insisted, should remain unopened until they spoke. Charles agreed. The conflict that had previously belonged to fathers, sons, advisors, and constitutional questions would now become something entirely different. Two women would meet without officials, without ceremonial formality, and without anyone speaking on their behalf. When Sophie entered the room, Camilla was already waiting beside the unopened dispatch box. Neither greeted the other with hostility. Both understood that they carried different burdens created by the same institution. Sophie began by explaining why she had asked for the meeting. She did not want her stewardship of Clarence House to begin through humiliation. If palace officials forced the box away or removed Camilla under security supervision, history would remember the transfer as one woman celebrating another's fall. She wanted no part in such an image. Camilla admitted that she had agreed to meet for a different reason. She wanted to know whether Sophie herself had participated in removing her from the residence. Throughout the conversation, she carefully watched Sophie's face, searching for satisfaction, guilt, or triumph. She found none. Instead, she saw discomfort. Without opening it, Sophie gently pushed the dispatch box back across the table. She explained that she had no interest in personal letters, private memories, or emotional keepsakes. Her only responsibility involved